Thank you and good morning everybody. It is November the 1st and yes, we are still members of the European Union. Yet more broken promises and indeed a breakdown of trust and faith, not just in politics but actually in our entire democratic system in this country. And that is why I came out of political retirement to found the Brexit Party, because I thought something had gone wrong and we'd even lost sight of what the Brexit vote was about. It was about us becoming an independent, self-governing nation. That's what people voted for, 17.4 million of them. And the sheer level of broken promises is astonishing. I mean, the Labour Party absolutely promised everybody during the campaign, after the campaign, and even in their general election manifesto that they would honour the result of the referendum and implement it. And yet, where are we now with Corbyn's Labour Party? Well, they're now promising us that if they win the election, they will go to Brussels and negotiate a new deal. They will put it to us in a second referendum, and it sounds like many of them will actually campaign against the deal their own government has negotiated. But they are offering us a choice of remain or effectively remain. And for 5 million Labour voters who turned out in that referendum back in June 16 and voted to leave, this represents nothing less than a complete and utter betrayal. It is a Labour Party that represents Islington, not Isloin, Hampstead, not Huddersfield, and Dalston, not Doncaster. And I have to say, the idea that these old Labour voters, Workington man, I think they're now described as, are suddenly going to vote for Boris Johnson and Boris's Conservative Party, I think is nonsense. I think we showed in those few weeks of the European elections what our potential appeal to Labour Leave voters was, because our highest scoring region was the North East, followed by, in fact, the results that took place in South Wales. So I think that the Brexit Party poses a very major problem to Labour, particularly in Wales, the Midlands, and certainly many parts of the north of England. And there are now so many Labour Leave seats represented by Remain members of Parliament that be in no doubt, in terms of winning seats, we view those constituencies around the country as being absolutely among our top targets. And perhaps to prove that point, in the course of the next week, I will be in the East Midlands, I will be up in the North East, I will be in South Wales, I will be in East London, and yes, next Wednesday, I'll be in Workington as well. Something I think that was completely misunderstood the last time I did this, which was in 2015, when I led UKIP into that general election. Everyone seemed to think, media commentators, newspaper editors, that somehow, because UKIP were fielding hundreds of candidates, we would have a very negative effect on the Conservative Party. And the absolute truth of it, something that is now acknowledged by some, is that it was in fact the UKIP vote that disproportionately hurt the Labour Party in those 2015 general election. And actually, there wouldn't have been a Conservative majority if it hadn't been for the effect of the UKIP vote. So this continued lazy thinking that somehow Brexit voters are all Conservatives is nonsense. This issue is so fundamental, it crosses all normal political divides. And I am pleased that Jeremy Corbyn will no longer be able to say in this campaign that if we get Brexit, if we leave the customs union and attempt to enter into a free trade deal with the United States of America, that somehow that means that our NHS is for sale. I was talking to an American friend of mine on the radio last night who indicated that is well and truly off the table. And what of Boris Johnson's Conservatives? Well, look, I'd be the first to accept that he did inherit a very difficult position. You know, he inherited Mrs. May's appalling surrender treaty, and he did it with the clock running down to the 31st of October. And I don't doubt for a moment that he tried his best to improve it. And perhaps the one significant achievement was that Great Britain is not committed to being in the customs union, but the price of that was appalling. The price of that was Northern Ireland being hived off, which I think for him personally represented a really pretty dreadful breach of the promises that he'd made at the DUP conference the year before. But it doesn't end there, of course, because now, if this treaty passes, and I very much hope it doesn't, it will lead to massive pressure in Scotland for the SNP to campaign for the same thing. Boris tells us it's a great new deal. It is not. It is a bad old treaty, and simply, it is not Brexit. What we are doing here is kicking the can down the road for at least a further 3 years, entering into another round of agonizing negotiations. And Monsieur Barnier, who, by the way, is rather more brilliant at negotiating than our side appears to have been in the last 3 years, Monsieur Barnier has set down the terms already. We are committing in an international treaty that Boris Johnson wants Parliament to vote for and for us to ratify. We are committing to negotiating for up to 3 years in line with the political declaration. And that means we're aiming for regulatory alignment. Yep, everything from financial services to fisheries would, if we do this trade deal, be tied to EU law. We will not in any way be taking back control of our laws, our money, or our borders. And I am actually grateful to President Trump for making it clear last night, doing it in a way he didn't want to hurt Boris Johnson. He's a fan of Boris Johnson. He thinks that Johnson has brought great energy to the job. But putting it very simply, that if we continue down this route, there will not be trade deals with the USA, or indeed, I don't think, any other parts of the world. Boris's deal gives us all of the burdens of EU membership, but no say whatsoever. And it will not get Brexit done. In fact, what it will do is lead to a campaign in which people say, we have no voice, we have no vote, we have no veto in the few areas that they're left. It will lead to a campaign for us to rejoin, a campaign that if it was put to a referendum, I have no doubt would actually succeed. So I want to urge Boris Johnson to reconsider the detail of what is in those two documents. And I say that because he gave an answer in the House of Commons on fisheries. He gave an answer in the House of Commons on Northern Ireland exporters to Great Britain. And both of those answers simply weren't true. And that suggests to me that in his desperate desire to get rid of the backstop, to bounce Parliament, sitting for the first time on a Saturday in 37 years, to bounce them into agreeing it, I'm not sure he's actually looked at the full details himself. A general election is a chance to press the reset button. A general election is a chance to pursue a different agenda. After all, no parliament may bind its successors. It's what we expect in general elections, in main party manifestos. So I'm going to say this to Boris Johnson: drop the deal. Drop the deal because it's not Brexit. Drop the deal because as these weeks go by and people discover what it is that you've signed up to, they will not like it. And I also am more than willing to compromise my position. You see, I've been saying for months we have to go for a clean break Brexit. And I've said that because it was the only way of delivering Brexit on the 31st of October. But if Boris said that he now wanted to go down the route of a genuine free trade agreement, along the lines perhaps of Canada or other models, and that in doing so he would not sign us up to political linkage, he would not keep the continued jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, that he would simply go for a free trade deal, he'd give a deadline of the 1st of July, And failing that, of course, we could both go to Geneva, to the World Trade Organization, under Article 24. We could leave the European Union, but have several years, in fact, to negotiate the new agreement. If Boris was to go along with that, I would view that as being a totally reasonable position. And in the interest of building a Leave alliance, I would be more than happy to back that. Of course, he would have to say that if they were being completely unreasonable, if they didn't want a free trade deal, if they weren't prepared to go to Geneva, then of course we would leave on July the 1st on WTO terms, and he would have to say it, and indeed he really would have to mean it. Either way, pursuing that route would mean not having a new EU treaty. Pursuing that route would mean not entering into negotiations on the completely impossible conditions that Barnier has set out already in the political declaration, and that really would be Brexit. I believe the only way to solve this is to build a Leave alliance across this country. And that doesn't mean just Conservatives and the Brexit Party. There are Labour figures out there that I've spoken to who would more than happily stand in this election if we could put this coalition together. But if it was done, Boris Johnson would win a very big majority. And on that manifesto, we really could get Brexit done. In fact, to quote a friend of mine, we'd become an unstoppable force. I hope and pray that after 25 years of endeavour on my part, that this works. But if it doesn't, well then, the Brexit Party will be the only party standing in these elections that actually represents Brexit. And if that's the situation, there are two things that we will do. The first is to make sure that every house in this land is informed as to what is in the treaty and what is in the political declaration, what the costs of this are, what the time implications are, to make people truly understand the extent to which this is a sellout. And the second thing in those circumstances that we will do is we will contest every single seat in England, Scotland, and Wales. And please don't doubt that we are ready. Don't underestimate our determination or our organisation. Indeed, next Monday, we have 500 candidates coming to London, and they will all be signing their candidate forms on that day, and you're all very welcome to come along and to witness that. You know, as we showed in those European elections, we are able to attract a very high quality of candidate with far more diverse backgrounds than the Labour, Conservative or Liberal Democrat parties. And we're doing this because, you know, coming from all walks of life, we don't trust the establishment to deliver on their own. Indeed, if it hadn't been for Jimmy Goldsmith, the Conservatives would never have made the pledge to have a referendum before joining the euro. If it hadn't been for UKIP, there would have been no referendum on EU membership. And without the Brexit Party, we will never get a meaningful Brexit done. We are determined to deliver Brexit. We are equally determined, as you've heard earlier on this morning, that politics cannot just go back to the way that it was before. This country is crying out for genuine political reform, and we will campaign on that during this general election too, because we really do want to change politics for good. And I know inevitably you will ask me about funding. Well, I can tell you we have enough money right now for a fully funded election campaign, and by the look of the way money is coming in on our website, we will have more than enough to fight this campaign and to fight it well. Now, of course, I'm open and flexible to local exceptions, and already we are in communication with a number of MPs who are prepared to renounce the withdrawal agreement, to renounce the deal, and they themselves to stand on a ticket of a genuine free trade agreement or leave on WTO terms. And of course, in those cases where MPs say this, we will view them as our friends and not as our enemies. And more interestingly, already we're being approached to put together informal arrangements on the ground, constituencies in which they may have a better chance of winning and we won't bother to campaign, but equally constituencies in which we have got a better chance of winning and they won't campaign. And that is already beginning to come together. But that is not the real deal. The real deal is a Leave alliance that wins a big majority in Parliament. The real deal is a Leave alliance that delivers a genuine Brexit. I hope that common sense prevails over the course of the next 2 weeks. We are prepared, all of us in the Brexit Party, to put country before party, and we put that appeal out to Boris Johnson and others in the Conservative Party. Now is the right time to do this, but if they choose not to, we will stand up and do this on our own. 17.4 million people voted Brexit, and they deserve to get it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. So, I know Nigel's got some specific interviews with broadcasters and also with the print, but we'll have about half a dozen questions here in front of everybody. So, who'd like to start? Well, you've got your first hand up. If you say your name, where you're from, thank you very much.
Hi, William James from Reuters. You talked about what you would do if Boris didn't accept the deal. You'd stand MPs across the country. How many MPs will you stand if he does accept the deal? And also, how long's he got to consider this deal?
Well, nominations close on the 14th of November. So in theory, we've got up until the 14th of November to do this. That's as good as useless. So we've got up until the 14th of November, in theory, to do this. Look, you know, we absolutely recognise that they are a bigger party with a much bigger footprint on the ground in the constituencies than we've got, and we would be utterly and entirely sensible and reasonable. But it would be fair to say there are around about 150 seats in this country that are Labour-held constituencies that the Conservative Party have never, ever won in their history, and for cultural reasons, they're not going to win at this general election. And that I think is how a deal of this kind would work, a non-aggression pact of this kind would work, and I think it would be to our advantage, to their advantage, but most importantly, to Brexit's advantage. So all of that could be discussed, and we are, as I say, for us, despite the fact all of us on this platform in the last 6 months have put a lot of our lives into building this new political party, for us, the issue matters far more than the party. This is a big moment in history, and I actually feel that we're so close to getting that majority in Parliament and to getting a real Brexit delivered. And I just really hope, as I say, that the Conservatives genuinely rethink and reconsider this. This is a one-off opportunity. If we don't get it, and if we do finish up with that withdrawal agreement, then frankly, I think it's the end of Brexit, because it's a deal that is just so bad.
Right at the back there, yes, sir. That's it.
Thank you, Ben Kentish, The Independent. Mr Farage, what conversations are going on with Boris Johnson and other members of the government about this offer that you've made today? Have you had conversations, and will you be having them in the coming days?
I think there are more conversations this morning going on between Downing Street and the White House than there are going on with us, to be honest with you. Look, we have not spoken formally to anybody about this. We've spoken informally to people in and around and close to the Prime Minister. My understanding is there are some within the inner sanctum who think this is absolutely necessary. There are others who think it's the last thing they would ever do. Others who think we'd almost rather lose and then blame the Brexit Party afterwards than come to an accommodation. What I do know from the month of September, when Richard and I travelled right across the country doing a series of big public events, is that everywhere we go, we meet local associations who are absolutely desperate to do this. So I'm convinced that there's a big majority, actually within the party, that want to do this. Maybe one or two roadblocks in Downing Street.
Right, just to the front here.
Angus Walker, ITV News. Isn't it more realistic in terms of delivering Brexit for voters to vote Tory? Could a vote for the Brexit Party actually block Brexit?
If Mr. Johnson stands on the deal he did in Brussels 2 weeks ago and on implementing that treaty, that is not Brexit. And that's the point. It's not Brexit. It doesn't free us. It just kicks the can a few years further down the road. It's not Brexit. So in those circumstances, we would be the only Brexit choice. And here's Boris Johnson's problem. You know, with the sheer level of Brexit exhaustion, he comes back from Brussels and cries victory. And everyone says, oh, thank goodness for that. We've got a breakthrough, isn't it wonderful? And then it's put to Parliament, or supposed to be put to Parliament. Sir Oliver Letwin rather changed that, but put to Parliament before anyone's got time to even read it or to understand what is in it. And Boris Johnson's big problem is this. If he thinks he can survive 6 weeks on the basis of what's in those documents, without the country waking up, and without Brexiteers being appalled by it, he's got another think coming. So I think there is, as I say, a couple of weeks in which he can press the reset button on this, and I very much hope that he does. Well, look, I don't know what the likelihood is, and it doesn't have to be a pact, it can be a non-aggression pact. There are lots of different ways this can be done, but the idea of building a Leave alliance is one that I genuinely believe in.
Hi, John Johnston, Politics Home. Are you planning to stand as a candidate, and if so, in what seat?
I'm going to announce all of that in the next few days, but right now, to say what I'm doing or Richard's doing would be a massive distraction. You know, this is our big chance today to set the stage, to say we're very, very prepared to compromise, to work with other people, to build this alliance, but equally that we're ready to fight across the country. I would answer that question in 2 or 3 days' time.
Hello, Mr. Farage. Paul McNamara from Channel 4 News. This is an offer which Boris Johnson is never going to be able to accept. Isn't this just a waste of 2 weeks?
Well, it's not a waste of my 2 weeks. As I said to you, we'll be signing up 500 candidates on Monday. Come along and film it, by all means. You're very, very welcome. And they will be going out into the field and campaigning. In fact, many of them are out in the field and campaigning already. You know, I'm saying that we're going forward, we're ready, we're funded, we've got the people, we will fight this election on the basis of Brexit, political reform, and a whole other range of innovative policy issues. But we are prepared to put country before party. And in the end, it'll be up to them. I mean, I would have thought that with a strong, active Brexit party and a clear message on what we stand for, as opposed to a treaty and years more negotiations, that there comes a point within the next couple of weeks when they will say to themselves, even though we don't want to do this, even though the Conservative Party historically never does these things, actually, we've got no choice. Whether they do it out of high principle, whether they do it because they just want to win the election, I don't really care. I don't mind how it happens, I just care that it does.
Tom.
Hi Nigel, Tom Newton-Dunn from The Sun. Just to make clear your terms, it would appear you're asking Boris Johnson to stand aside, not field Tory candidates in 150 seats to give you a clear run, and in exchange, you won't field candidates in every other Tory seat. Is that correct? And secondly, if he doesn't accept your terms, what is your realistic hope going head-to-head against him everywhere of how many MPs you can get? 5, 10, 50?
On the first one, Tom, look, it's a negotiation, you know, but I've laid out what the upper end of expectations would be. All right, the very upper end. We are reasonable, sensible people. We want to get this done. In terms of winning seats, well, look, you know, no one knows more than me how punishing the first past the post electoral system can be. I know it better than anybody, and it's difficult. The difference, Tom, this time is there are now many more seats that are 3 or 4 way marginals, where a score of 30, 31% can win seats. So I'm not going to make any silly, wild predictions, but it's going to be much easier to win seats in constituencies in this election than it's been in modern history.
We've got time for about 3 more. Kate.
Hi, it's Kate Proctor from The Guardian. Nigel, is the stumbling block to you forming this Leave alliance specifically the fault of Dominic Cummings?
I don't know is the honest truth. You know, I'm sure he's a very charming chap and easy to work with, but I don't know. All I can say to them is this. If they really think they're going to win this election with their Workington Man proposal, they really want to get outside of the office and of London a little bit more, because they really are whistling in the wind. They need to rethink this. You know, I find it very interesting that on the tour that Richard and I did, we did a day in Doncaster, a big event at the racecourse in the evening, and it was an area which in the European elections we topped the poll in pretty much every single constituency, or at least council area as they were counted. And 5 days later, who was in Doncaster? Boris Johnson. I think he perhaps should be spending more time in seats where they're vulnerable to the Liberal Democrats, rather than wasting his time going after the old Labour Leave vote. As I say, I don't know fully what their thinking is, but I do know, because I have had reach out from some who visit that building regularly, so there is a conversation going on.
Thank you, Andy Bell, 5 News. Mr. Farage, I mean, it might not be the purest form of Brexit that you would like, but there are millions of people out there who voted for Brexit in 2016 who think they're about to get it with Boris Johnson's agreement. Aren't they entitled to say, you're the one who's now going to mess this up by potentially allowing Jeremy Corbyn into Downing Street, and there'll be another EU referendum, and that will be the end of Brexit?
Well, quite often people buy used cars and the bonnet looks quite shiny and it all looks very attractive, but it breaks down rather quickly and is a disappointment in every regard. And that's exactly what Boris is trying to do. He's trying to sell a second-hand motor where he's polished up the bonnet, but actually underneath, nothing has changed. This is Mrs. May's appalling surrender treaty. That is what it is. And I would say this to you. Do people want resolution on this? Of course they do, and I understand that completely. But this is not Brexit. If he decides that he can go on selling this as Brexit, very good luck to him. Because I think by the time December the 12th comes along, the country will understand what's in it, will understand that it's not Brexit. We will make sure of that.
I mean, you keep saying that you are the only party fighting for a real Brexit, but there is more than a reality that you would split the Brexit vote. So do you accept that there is at least a risk that you could be the last hope of Remainers and those campaigning for a people's vote? At least a risk?
Well, I think you're right, John. I mean, I think the risk of the vote being split is very real. Very real. We saw it in Peterborough. You know, we were the lead challenger to the incumbent Labour Party, and because there was a Conservative candidate, the Labour Party won by 600 votes. It's a seat the Brexit Party would have won if the Conservatives had not split our vote. And equally, in Brecon and Radnor, which in the end became a very close head-to-head between the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives. The Liberal Democrats won by a relatively small margin, and the Brexit Party vote, although a weak seat for us, was in double digits. There's a classic case there of 2 parliamentary by-elections that we've seen since the European elections that both could have gone to Leavers and both went to Remainers. So I would say this actually cuts both ways. And that's why the logic of doing a deal, and I've explained, in answering Tom's question, that we are not asking for a vast number of seats compared to what they would need. This actually works. The mathematics works. And this isn't just me. I mean, Professor John Curtis himself has looked at this and said the mathematics of this works.
Deal you do accept. Without a deal, you could be risking Brexit.
No, this deal isn't Brexit. That's the point.
Right at the back.
Nigel Theo from LBC. Just very quickly, is there a danger that Boris Johnson was to say something to you before November the 14th when nominations close, you're able to do a deal on your clean break Brexit platform, and then the manifesto, the Conservative manifesto, looks markedly different from what he promises you?
Well, he is good at changing his mind, I'll grant you that, because he's talked about Mrs. May's awful surrender treaty as being vassalage, and then on the third occasion voted for it. So he does chop and change a little bit. Look, I think it's actually very simple. There is 2 weeks to put together a Leave alliance, and it needs to be done.
Last question, just here in the middle.
David Reid, CNBC. Do you think the Conservative Party is looking at the polls, and if they are, they're thinking, we don't need this offer?
Well, if they want to think that, that's absolutely fine. If they want to think that, that's absolutely fine. If they think if they think that suddenly, after years of letting people down and breaking virtually every manifesto promise they've made at election after election, that they can stand up as the Conservative Party and all the Leave voters in the country will say, hooray, you know, we are all going to back Boris Johnson. They don't understand the makeup of Brexit voters in this country. No one party owns the Brexit vote, and that even includes the Brexit Party. This is something that crosses all traditional loyalties and divides, and it's why the only way to get Brexit done is to form a Leave alliance and to win this election with a big, stonking majority.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.